But what about the people who don't really fit? There's this fascinating microgeneration, kind of caught in the crossfire between two worlds, and their story is all about one massive, world-changing collision.
So here's the one question that cuts right to the chase. If you can clearly remember the clunky, satisfying spin of a rotary phone, but you also remember the absolute magic of holding that first iPhone, well then we're probably talking about you. This is more than just trivia. It's about having one foot in an analog world and the other in a digital one, right during your most formative years.
And that's where this term Xennial comes from. It's for that specific group born roughly between 1976 and 1985. The whole reason they're considered a microgeneration is because their entire identity was shaped by one single spectacular event, the internet revolution hitting the planet right when they were coming of age.
Okay, so to really get what makes a Xennial tick, we've got to go back in time. I'm talking about a world without Wi-Fi, without smartphones, a world that, honestly, is getting harder and harder to even imagine. Let's remember what that actually felt like.
Think about what this list really means for your brain. Boredom wasn't a problem to be solved with a phone. You just were bored. You had to sit with it. If you missed Cheers, well, you missed it. It was gone. And making plans? That was an act of faith. You'd say, see you at the mall at 3, and you just had to trust they'd show up. There was no OMW text. That built a totally different kind of patience and self-reliance.
And then, bam! Just as Xennials were hitting their late teens and early 20s, the world flipped a switch. And it wasn't a slow, gradual change. For them, it felt like it happened practically overnight.
I mean, just look at this. It's pure whiplash. One minute, your social life is about passing folded-up notes in the hallway. The next, you're building a MySpace profile, getting your first brick of a cell phone, and trying to keep up with AIM, MSN Messenger, and ICQ all at once. Most generations grow up in one kind of world. Xennials got two, slammed back to back.
So you have to wonder, right? How on earth did they do it? How did a generation that grew up using payphones suddenly become fluent in the language of the internet? Well, it wasn't just about being smart or being lucky. The answer is actually neuroscience.
See, it all comes down to this really cool bit of science. The part of our brain that's in charge of learning new things and adapting to change, the prefrontal cortex, is super flexible, or plastic, all the way up to our mid-20s. And for Xennials, the digital revolution landed right smack in the middle of that wide-open window.
And that's the magic formula right there. They were young enough that learning all this new tech felt natural, almost intuitive. It wasn't a chore. But they were also just old enough to have these crystal clear memories of what life was like before. This created a kind of digital bilingualism that truly sets them apart.
So what happens when you raise an entire generation in two completely different realities? Well, you don't just get someone who's good with computers. You get a genuinely paradoxical personality, a blend of traits that, on paper, shouldn't even exist in the same person.
It's like having two different operating systems running at the same time. You've got that classic Gen X skepticism and self-reliance, born from a childhood where you had to figure stuff out on your own, but you've also got that early millennial optimism from when the internet felt like this amazing tool that was just going to connect everyone. They love the idea of being unreachable, yet they're masters of a totally connected world. And think about this. It completely changed their relationship with their own past. That awful haircut from 8th grade, that breakup that felt like the end of the world. For Xennials, those things are just stories, hazy memories. They're not a permanent, searchable, taggable archive online. The past was allowed to do what it's supposed to do: fade.
Now, as if navigating a complete rewiring of human society wasn't enough drama, there was one more major event waiting for them. And of course, it hit at the absolute worst possible moment.
Just look at this timeline. It is brutal. They're graduating college, they're getting their first real apartments, their first career track jobs, they're just starting to build their adult lives. And then, in 2008, the floor completely drops out of the global economy. It wasn't just bad luck, it was a defining economic trauma.
And having the rug pulled out from under you like that right when you're supposed to be building a foundation, well, it leaves a mark. It creates this deep, lingering anxiety about financial security, a wariness about taking risks that just doesn't fade, even when things get better. It's that little voice in the back of your head that's always asking, what if it all falls apart again?
But here's the twist in the story. What if being caught in the middle, being the in-between generation, wasn't a flaw? What if it was actually their superpower?
Because they've lived on both sides of that great digital divide, Xennials have this incredibly unique perspective. They can remember the deep, quiet focus that comes from being truly alone with your thoughts. But they also totally appreciate having the world's knowledge and a global community right at their fingertips. They understand, on a gut level, exactly what was lost and exactly what was gained.
So here's the bottom line. The feeling of not quite being Gen X and not quite being a millennial, that's not the real story. That's just a side effect. The true defining feature of the Xennial experience is the incredible, hard-won ability to adapt. They survived one of the fastest, most disorienting cultural shifts in history, and it taught them the most valuable lesson there is. Change is the only constant.
In the end, the story of the Xennial is really a story about all of us. They're this living bridge between the world we left behind and the one we live in now, constantly reminding us to ask that big question. With every new technology, every new shift, what are we trading away and what are we getting in return? Their experience isn't just about one generation. It's a roadmap for how to navigate a future that won't stop changing.